All right, Michael, what do you think? Should we get rolling here?
Let's get it rolling.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Richard Barga. I am Vice President of Economic Development for Midtown Cleveland, and I'm really honored tonight to be joined by Michael Elliott from Cleveland Neighborhood Progress as we kick off our inaugural edition of Real Estate 101, a Midtown Cleveland community conversation. Tonight we're going to be talking about real estate development and trying to understand some basic concepts around real estate literacy. You can go on to the next slide if you want. This series was kicked off primarily through a lot of community discussions about understanding sort of the fundamentals of real estate and trying to help community members get a better idea of what was happening in their environment around them. Midtown has piloted this series with our own team internally and felt like this would be a great way to talk about real estate and explain some of these processes through community conversations. And so what we've done is we've designed a 4-part series that is designed to walk us through a number of different aspects of the real estate process. So tonight we're going to be talking about why real estate? Why are we even talking about this in general? Who are some of the players that are involved? And how do we, the community and Midtown Cleveland and our partners and our other nonprofit partners play a role in this process? In the upcoming series, we're going to do one of these once a month for the next 4 months, planning on covering the development process and what you should look at when you're thinking about developing real estate, some of the laws and transactions and sort of terminology around buying and selling real estate. And then finally, understanding some of the financing aspects and understanding some of the different things that go into the different types of risk assessment in the end. So we hope that you come away with a number of different points of knowledge in this process. Next slide. Oh, and that's funny. I have here in my notes that I'm supposed to introduce ourselves. So why am I talking about real estate? As Vice President of Economic Development for Midtown Cleveland, my background is actually in real estate development. I have an undergraduate degree from Ohio State and a real estate finance degree from New York University. And I moved back to Cleveland to be part of the renaissance here, to think about economic development and community development as a tool for how we can advance equity in our communities. I've been really fortunate to work down at City Hall and see projects from all over the city and working from affordable housing to commercial and industrial rehabilitation projects, which is where I got to know my colleague, Michael. Michael?
Hello, everyone. Michael Elliott, Director of Neighborhood Economic Development with the city of, not with the city of Cleveland anymore. No, with the Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. I actually started my economic development career with the city of Cleveland, working out of the Economic Development Department for about, I would say, almost 5.5 years. I was actually a cubicle mates with Richard, and I actually learned a lot about the real estate game from just kind of listening in on a lot of his conversations. So I go way back as far as financial services. Insurance has been my background, and small business lending was a primary focus for me coming up within the economic development industry.
Great. So, and thanks so much for joining us, Michael. And we're proud to have Cleveland Neighborhood Progress as our partners as part of the series. So what do we hope that you're going to gain from this course? We're going to introduce some real estate concepts from, like you saw in the previous slide, from financing to zoning to site selection and all in between. We hope that we are advancing some conversations that will help develop stronger ties and create better engagement in the community around the participation and development. And we really hope that we can help maybe help some people take some steps towards maybe doing development on their own. But the end goal of this whole course is really to demystify traditional real estate development processes. Processes that, whether it's from the mortgage industry or the construction industry, or even just understanding land and land use. Processes that aren't talked about at kitchen tables and out in the open. So we're really hoping to spread some of that knowledge out for you tonight. Next slide.
So what will you leave with? Primarily going to leave with copies of the presentation. We want to make sure that everyone who participates get a copy of this presentation so that you can look back as you go through this series and you're able to leverage this information that you collect to be more engaged within the real estate process. We're also going to provide links to free website and resources. Again, if you're looking at seriously considering getting into the real estate industry, or if you want to learn more, again, one of the things that we're going to make sure that we're doing in each session is providing links and resources so that you can begin learning more about this industry. And lastly, we're hoping that you can leave with contacts and connections. I firmly believe that the real estate industry is definitely a relationship-oriented industry. I think as you get to know one another, as well as the different players that we'll talk about later within this webinar, I think it's really critical that you make these connections and make sure you're gaining context so that you're best positioning yourself and your potential project for success. Next slide. So just a little engagement we'll get from for those who are in attendance. Again, thank you everyone for joining. So what do you hope to gain from this course? Some look to gain or want to know how to sell their house. Others may want to know what an appraiser does or what zoning is. So in the chat, we're just going to take a few moments, if you don't mind, in the chat, just basically just kind of give us some insight of what you hope to gain from this course today and through the series. We'll wait for some different responses in the chat.
I know in a lot of our conversations, people are always wondering about how do you make money in real estate? You know, should you flip houses? The risks involved, a great question to really understand. And we're going to talk about, you know, there are potential rewards in real estate development, but there are a lot of risks as well. So understanding that is important. Is now the time to purchase?
And where? That's a good question.
Great
We're
question.
looking at that as well too. Yeah,
we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next session when we talk about site selection and thinking about what is, you know, how do you determine worth on a value on a property?
Yeah. What is zoning and how do I make money in real estate? Excellent. Also, I want to know how to utilize real estate by my business and for community uplifting. That's a great, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of how real estate affects community. So thank you very much, Keith, for forwarding that question. We'll go to the next slide. So Barg, if I could be a little transparent, prior to working with the city of Cleveland, I knew little about real estate. You know, you can see all the buildings going up, you know, you walk around your neighborhood and you see a house being renovated and, you know, you don't realize how much work, time, and energy goes into your project until you actually work within the real estate industry. Sometimes some projects, especially small scale, might take a few months. But when you're talking about large real estate projects, you could be talking about years of preparation. So one of the main goals of this particular course and future courses is really to kind of demystify the real estate process. That's not to diminish that, you know, there's not challenges. That's not to diminish the hard work that's involved. But one of the things that you'll quickly learn is that it's not rocket science. That if you make sure that you're connected to the right people, building those relationships, you'll finally see that you'll start to see how all the dots connected within the real estate industry. Bart, you had any other additional thoughts?
Well, I would just say that, my parents were not involved in real estate. My grandparents were not involved in real estate. My family was not involved in real estate at all. So I never had exposure to this industry. And, real estate makes up almost 20% of the national economy, whether you're talking about insurance, land, development, construction, but it's a very insular industry. And it's not, so, why we put this slide up is, people traditionally haven't wanted us talking about these things, especially banking and mortgages and financing. All those things are, unless you're exposed to it. I know when I went to school, they put up a picture of a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a firefighter. Nobody said, hey, you can make a career in real estate development, or maybe you should know how the world is being constructed around you, or any of the laws surrounding it. So, one of the things we hope to talk about, and we're going to talk about tonight, is sort of all of the different ways that careers and industry and like sub industries influence the real estate development. Next slide. Great. And so, real estate is a global empire, right? Real estate is everywhere. And when you think about our current system descended from kings and feudal lords, and has been passed on from generation to generation, and has been basically old white male dominated across as long as it's been in existence. And the global capitalist structure lends itself to having this sort of hierarchical approach, and doesn't really want a lot of influence outside of it. So this is we put this slide up to sort of underscore that real estate is everywhere, from home buying to tax maps and everything around. When you walk around, whether you're looking at the land, a vacant piece of land, or some other or a house in a subdivision, there's real estate that is involved in everything you're looking at. Go on the next slide, please.
And we also want to talk about the context that many communities have experienced as a result of redlining and other factors that have really caused real estate to be a mystery to some folks. Understanding today's landscape requires some historical context. Many development practices and policies have shaped the current built environment. It's just something that didn't come about naturally, but way neighborhoods are conformed and shaped, and where people are located, a lot of has some background and context regarding racial and social exclusion practices. So, we're not going to go a deep dive in these particular practices and what happened. We want to definitely recognize that what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis is a result of many factors of discrimination and racial policies. But today is really about making sure that we're informing, uplifting, and making sure that those who want to enter the real estate industry have the equipment, or not the equipment, excuse me, the skills and knowledge to do so.
Can you go back 1 second, Alex? I want to just say, this is something that Midtown is extremely focused on. As we've seen the redevelopment of Euclid Avenue, we have not, and the reinvestment along Euclid Avenue, we have not seen the same type of equitable development along north of Chester into the Huff community, or south of Carnegie and Cedar into the central community. And so as Midtown thinks about our role, how are we taking our equitable development practices, policies, and talking to developers about what they need to be thinking about, and what we hope that we are including in projects to help uplift communities is specifically shaped by this historical redlining that we have looked at in our neighborhood. And Chester Avenue is just a tremendous physical barrier to for the community, for the Huff community, having access to all of the investment in and along Euclid Avenue. So we wanted to take a moment and highlight this. If you're interested in more information on redlining specifically, happy to send it. We could probably teach a PhD course on redlining. I mean, I couldn't, but I could refer you to people that could. But it is something that we deal with on a daily basis. Now you can go on to the next slide. So wanted to also take a second here and ask a question, and feel free to pop some thoughts in the chat. But what does real estate mean to you? And maybe think about that for a second. When you hear the term real estate, you know, who or what image is conjured up? It might be a picture of this guy. It might be. I hope not, because that's definitely not the only impression that real estate should mean to you. There are a lot of other, let's see what's happening over here in the chat. Other ideas. Where can you locate a map of land that is in the city land bank? Great question, Carolyn. We'll show you. We'll provide that resource coming up. What is zoning? Maybe that's from earlier. Anyway, so here's some of the thoughts that we said about what does real estate mean? Real estate can mean buildings. It can mean land. It can mean money. It can mean a landlord. It could mean rent, buildings. There you go. Mortgages, success, all these things, right? And so that, you know, what I wanted to present to you on this slide is really a picture of people in Cleveland who are doing real estate development, people in our community who are doing, not just Donald Trump. This is, you know, that we are really hoping, you know, to help and highlight developers from all races, creeds, and backgrounds who want to be a part of our community. And these are some of the folks that are doing it here in Midtown. Next slide.
So let's get a little bit into what is real estate. So real estate can be broken up into really 4 different buckets depending on the use. We got residential, which most of us are probably familiar with. We probably have houses that we live in or renting one. We got commercial, and that's an area that I focus in a lot with Barga as far as helping businesses or developers gain access or build real estate. Industrial is another use, real estate use, depending on the industry. And of course, every piece of real estate is actually built on some form of land. As you look into the real estate industry, you have to kind of weigh all the pros and cons of each type of real estate category. A house or a residential property has its own kind of unique challenges, regulations, its own benefits, pros and cons, versus someone who's looking at commercial, which has a different kind of return or benefits or various type of legislative or regulatory type of requirements. When you're looking into the real estate industry, make sure you're weighing all the pros and cons for each one of these as well too. Again, all of them have something about them that is unique, that you know you have to look at differently. You're going to kind of look within yourself and say, what kind of risks I'm going to take as a result of the real estate industry. Barg, any additional thoughts on that?
No, I would just say that this is like you highlighted, residential is much different than industrial, and industrial real estate is factories, residential is homes. And those are classifications that are commonly used in the industry. Next slide. So why is Midtown, or what does Midtown see as real estate benefits, right? We see utilizing real estate to create social networks, walkable communities, safe neighborhoods, transit-oriented development. We believe in these type of public parks and space to create health benefits and social networks. These are all of the things that Midtown is working to achieve through real estate, goals that we have that we are trying to bend and shape these real estate developments to address. Next slide.
Now, one of the things that, growing up in different communities, I will always want to know why certain buildings remain abandoned or why certain areas are deteriorating, why others are growing. And as I began to talk to developers across the country, again, one of the opportunities I had with a different employer was National Development Council. So I had the opportunity to talk to many different developers across the country. And one of the biggest things they honed on with me and said, hey, Michael, some of the reasons why you see certain areas go up, some areas go down, certain buildings stay the way they are, or deteriorate for years, is because developers just can't make the numbers work. So one of the things that as future or potential developers or folks who are interested in this particular industry is that you have to make the numbers work. Now, you can have all the desire to want to uplift your community. You may have all the desire to want to change people's lives and provide affordable housing, for example. But if the numbers don't work, they just don't work. We're talking about when it comes to getting financing from a lender to develop your property, when it comes to raising the cash, what type of return that you're looking for. If the numbers don't work, a lot of times nothing's going to happen within your particular community or with a particular project. Some of the questions that many developers kind of ask themselves to determine if the numbers are going to work is, how do you determine the value of an investment property? So we'll talk a little bit about appraisals later on within this series. What type of return do I want? So that is very subjective. Some people might be good with just a 1% return because they have very community-minded kind of goals. I want to provide affordable housing, so I'm willing to forego some of the profit. Others say, hey, I want a 10, 15% return, in which they have to ask the question of themselves, hey, where can I get the highest return on the property? So within the series, we'll talk about value and subjective value, and that even though I may think that something is worth X amount of dollars, doesn't mean that somebody else is going to think it's worth the same amount as well, too. Next slide.
Great. So that was a perfect lead in to talk about real estate. When it comes down to it, you have to start to think about those dollar signs, right? And real estate is really a financial asset. And if you haven't heard that term before, think about what something is worth. What is that intrinsic worth due to, in dollars and cents? It is whether it's a car, whether it's a building, whether it's a block of gold, whether it's, some other type, some lumber out in the woods. It's an asset. It is something that can be bought and sold and traded, and real estate is no different. This is really where we start to separate all of those great social benefits that I was talking about 2 slides ago, and start to think about real estate as those dollar signs that Michael was just talking about. Next slide.
So as the slide says, make no mistake, real estate is an investment. One of the points that we'll talk about through this series is that real estate is an investment with the possibility of actually making money. So you always have to, kind of determine, hey, I got a pocket of money, or I'm trying to leverage my money to make more money. As you can see, there's various different tools. You can go into common stocks, you can go bonds, you can go into hedge funds, mutual funds, access allocations, brokers. There's different ways that you can invest. But you always want to ask the question, why am I doing it? Investing is an effective way to put your money to work and potentially build more wealth. One of the things that I learned about developers, they're always looking for opportunities to leverage somebody else's money. They're always trying to figure out, how can I keep as much money in my pocket so that I can go to another project and develop those projects as well, too. So you find a lot of developers leveraging their money to, get more money from a lender. or they become very savvy when it comes to like new market tax credits. We'll talk a little bit about that later in the series, or other type of tax credit benefits. So you want to make sure that you come in knowing, why do I want to invest? What other mechanisms can I, outside of real estate, can I look into investing, and kind of weigh all the pros and cons before you actually make a decision to go into the real estate industry. With well-chosen assets, investors can enjoy predictable cash returns, tax advantages, and more. Again, another question about why, answer to why I want to invest in a particular industry. Next slide.
Great. So all of this boils down to the idea that real estate has a dollar value. You put a dollar, you assign a value to a piece of property. And there are a number of different ways that people sort of come up with that value. Appraisers do it. The county does it when they assess your taxes. We do it when, or individuals do it when they're buying or selling properties, and they look at, here's what neighborhood is this property in? How's the market for single family homes or for industrial buildings? Are they going through a boom time? Are they going through a recession? What's the condition of that building? Does it need a new roof? Does it need a new electrical system? Is it brand new? What neighborhood is it in? Or maybe how old is that building? Is it new construction? Is it 100 years old? But ultimately, the big question that it comes down to is the property that you own or that you are looking at is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. So you may think it's worth $1 million, but if somebody is only willing to pay $200,000 and you choose to sell it to that person for $200,000, then that's the value of the property. And that's really the game. We talk about what is the worth of that property based on what someone is willing to pay.
I can make another point right quick, Varga. When it comes to that value, as it states, location, market, we're talking about school district, all those things come into play when someone wants to evaluate the value of a particular real estate. So one of the big things that a lot of families are looking at is, hey, if I go into a particular certain neighborhood, the value must reflect on the school district, for example. Typically, residential homes in very well-to-do school districts are going to typically be able to charge a higher rate for their particular homes as well. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, and so, and one definite distinction that we like to make in the real estate industry is that not only does your building have value, but also your land can have value as well. And so as you see here in this depiction, properties, whether they are wherever the building is versus what the piece of land that the building is on, they both combine or get assessed to having different value. So when we think about a project as a whole, there's generally two different values. There's a value for that land and a value for that building. Next slide.
All right, so I saw one of the questions, how do you make money in real estate? Well, we'll go over some quick examples here. As an owner of real estate property, you have the option to either sell your property or lease your property. And again, based on the location that the property is in and a number of other factors we'll talk about during the series, you can sell your property at a particular rate. Now, a lot of folks get into the industry with the desire of flipping houses. They try to purchase the residential or commercial property at a very low rate, fix it up at the lowest cost they can possibly do, and then flip it to a higher rate to hopefully gain a profit. That's one method. or they want to hold on to the property and go through the process of leasing out the property to tenants. So that's one way, as a couple of ways as the owner. Additionally, real estate investors might make money through real estate income, rental income, and appreciation. So again, this is a wealth building tool that a lot of people purchase real estate for. They hold on to the property with the hopes that over time it will appreciate. And it's a safe bet for most. I know we've had housing crisis throughout the years and decades, but most people will consider real estate as a safe investment. And the benefits of investing in real estate include stable cash flow if you are selecting the correct renters or lessees. Also tax advantages that we'll go into a little bit detail. But we also have a pro forma, which is the bread and butter of any kind of real estate project you choose. Pro forma is one that's going to help you determine if it's well worth the risk. Many investors will have to create a pro forma. Many lenders or those who are investing in the property are going to want to look at a pro forma to see what kind of return are they going to have, how much they have to pay for lease or rent rates in that particular area. Next slide.
Okay, let's take a pause. We're throwing a lot at you in the first half hour, and we felt like maybe a breather, and I see we've got some complicated questions coming in. And feel free to pop questions in the chat. Are we going too fast? Are we going too slow? Do you feel like you want us to spend more time on any of these slides? Just feel free to take a pause. For the question that's come in about the new apartment buildings versus condo or single family. So I would say that this is really a market driven, well, it's really a question of the real estate market in general. And I'm happy to follow up and talk more specifically about this. The trend of apartments getting smaller is probably true, as developers do tend to try to squeeze more units into their development projects, so that they can have more renters and make more money. Has been a trend over the last 10 years with millennials, having less desire to purchase things. I think we've seen that as a trend, or a minimalist almost type of culture. But the question about the market is much more complicated. So I'm happy to follow up with you later. Let's see. If you're interested in purchasing commercial real estate, what is the best way to approach that purchase? Seller representation negotiation. Great question. I think that we'll cover a little bit of that today, but more when we talk about actual transactions, where we've got buyers and sellers laws, rights, and all that in session 3. So stay tuned for that one. All right, let's keep going.
All right. All right, so we're going to go a little bit into the players within the particular industry. A lot of players, and one of the things that we want to point out during this presentation is really, you may want to go in being the developer, being that key person, that point person, but there's a lot of other ways you can get involved within this particular industry.
Go ahead, next slide. But I think we think about it a lot like a baseball team, like everybody plays a role. And that's why you've got a lot of pictures of this. So, some basic understanding of who does what in when you're dealing with real estate. So, you really need to think about some of what perspective you're standing in. Are you the owner? Are you a renter? Or are you the landlord versus a tenant? Those can essentially be, flip-flop there as terminology. If you're a buyer versus a seller, right? There are different rights or roles, and who has what role are you playing in this transaction? One more time. Like, are you the developer or are you the contractor? This is oftentimes confused when you're doing a much bigger project. Sometimes developers have contractors on staff, and sometimes developers hire contractors. Are they the owner? Are they a side party that's doing a development project? All of these sort of, what I always try to dig into is like, what's the role of this individual in this process, or in this, so that you have a better idea of who you're dealing with and what they are trying to accomplish. Go ahead. Next slide.
So key players, who does what in construction? So to start off, most folks are probably familiar with the general contractor. That's the person responsible for the overall construction. Typically, general contractors will sub out their work to those with more specialized skills, like electrician, for example, or plumbing and installation. But most folks are very familiar with a general contractor. Those are usually the individuals that you see kind of working on the building as it's going up. The architect is usually that first person that many developers are speaking to. I like to call them the creative people. They're the ones that put the designs together. They're the ones that kind of helps the developer create a detailed building plan prior to the construction process. Environmental consultants. Now, this is something when I was working at the city of Cleveland, I wished a lot of developers or those interested in getting into the real estate industry probably worked with a lot. I find that a lot of individuals are just purchasing property with no type of assistance. They just have a desire, I want to have something tangible. But a lot of times they run into a very interesting situation where, because they didn't take the time to actually do the due diligence, many of them are finding themselves with brownfield type property, or property that unfortunately has a lot of contamination to it. So with any kind of construction or development project that you're working on, you definitely want to have an environmental consultant, someone who oversees any remediation work to reduce environmental contamination to an acceptable level. So please make sure, if you're getting into the real estate industry, make sure, especially if you're doing real estate in the city of Cleveland, make sure you're getting an environmental consultant as one of your team members. Next is a landscape architect. This person designs functional and attractive public and private areas in and around the property. Again, if you want to talk about value and if you want to increase the value of your particular property, you definitely want to make sure that you have a landscape architect as your partner. And lastly, civil engineer. This individual assesses land use and identify the infrastructure needs. So you definitely want to have all these individuals on your team so that as you go through the development process, you're making sure you're covering all your bases. Next slide.
Great. So, okay, so we've talked about construction. What about financing? How do you finance, or who finances real estate development? So the first person that I think, or the first person here, is an appraiser. An appraiser is an expert who goes through a lot of those key questions that we talked about earlier to determine the value of the property. And he is hired by, many times, the bank and our lenders to give that value and provide the banks with an assurance that this is the value of the property, so that a bank or a lender can provide financing for the new construction or some type of loans that are needed to actually fund the construction of the project. Now, there are also other entities that can provide financing, like insurance companies and private equity firms, outside of lenders and banks. There are even mortgage brokers and mortgage bankers, and these are all just sort of different types of people that can lend you money. I have a big slide in our session 4 with lenders, where we talk about lenders and borrowers. And then lastly, we have market consultants who, to the question earlier, help investors determine the demand for a project and its economic feasibility. So these are people that are going to look at the market as a whole and determine whether or not it's good for investors to invest in a specific type of real estate project. Next slide.
All right. So lastly, we have the key players who does what regarding buying and selling transactions. So we got the real estate broker. This is an individual that represents a buyer or seller of a property and land acquisition, subdivided lot sales, and property acquisition and sale. So there was a question about, as far as how you should go about the real estate game. You want to definitely look at maybe in finding out a good real estate broker who's going to help, especially if you're not familiar with it. Again, my experience working with a lot of individuals who, again, desires to get into the real estate industry, this is where they kind of go wrong. They do it themselves without doing all the due diligence. As you first get into it, a real estate broker might be an ideal partner that you might want to have, but you definitely want to make sure you're building a relationship. Another is an attorney. Reviews legal documents related to land acquisition, leasing, zoning, contracts, etc. Again, for those who are interested in getting into the real estate industry, again, all these things might start getting very pricey. So again, that's one of the things you want to really evaluate before you get into the real estate industry is the cost that it's going to probably take. A lot of folks, unfortunately, do not think about these individuals just out of, I want to get it done. But again, you definitely want to have these individuals playing on your team when you're doing real estate investing. Title companies, these are individuals that ensure that a property title is legitimate, free of any liens or encumbrances before the title is transferred. Again, another situation where people are buying property, for example, again, they just don't know what they don't know. And I'm finding a lot of situations where they buy property that may be clean of any kind of brownfield issues, but there could be a lot of tax lien issues on it. So I buy a property, let's say the prior owner is back on taxes or any other issues, and maybe they don't disclose that to me. And unfortunately, I'm going to be the one that's going to have to take on those particular liabilities. So having a title company reviewing your property is going to be very key in the real estate industry. And then you got your leasing agent, works to maximize gross revenue by leasing to tenants. So again, you could do this by yourself, but again, having someone like that on your team can help you maximize how much you can actually pay or charge for leases or for your tenants. Next slide.
Okay, and then who are some of the community players that help with real estate development? So the first is a city planner. There he goes. Who's an official who works on all different aspects of the project, such as zoning and ingress and security and water drainage, all of these different things the city planner thinks about and helps projects navigate as they go through the different processes. Then there are a number of different city officials, whether they're in the Department of Economic Development, who are thinking about commercial and industrial projects like Michael and I, or community development who work in residential and in a lot of the single family home development. And then the actual building department, who is responsible for permits and reviewing the laws to make sure that your building is structurally sound. All of these different city officials work together to help provide guidance on how you can build a safe and secure project. So then another key person that is important in this process is a surveyor. Now, they're not necessarily on the public side, but they work specifically with all the different public aspects of what are the legal boundaries of a project. So they are preparing maps and helping everyone identify where does your yard end and where does your neighbors begin. So important stuff that we'll talk about. Also, there's your council person who are advocates for projects and especially help facilitate projects, whether they're going through the zoning process or helping get a permit. Council people are always advocates for your projects. And last but not least is the community development corporations like myself and our team at Midtown, who are working to ensure those positive benefits to the community that we talked about earlier. And so next slide. How do we try to do that? We try to work through a number of different ways. In the top right, you can see a picture of the new Dave's supermarket that we help locate in Midtown. So whether it's introducing the type of tenants or the type of projects that we are looking for, in this case, a much needed grocery store in a long abandoned food desert, or going through city design review processes and helping advocate for public funding. All of these are different ways that Midtown plays a role in community building and real estate. Whew. All right, next slide. So so let's pause for questions here. Come back to the chat.
I see one here from Kathleen here. Thank you for the question. I'm not sure how you feel about this, Barga, but I know that certain lenders have certain appetites for a certain type of real estate, certain dollar amounts that they feel is worthy. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but it's basically, hey, we don't want to do deals less than $150,000, for example. I know that one of the subsidiaries of Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, Village Capital, is a CDFI that can take a look at these particular kind of deals. They are definitely passionate about community development as well as economic development within the real estate space. And so I'll put a link to them within the chat here so you can check them out and contact them if you have any additional questions.
I would also say that your impression is not wrong. There are a number of factors that go into commercial lending. Great question, Carolyn. What is a CDFI? That unfortunately, we can't force banks to lend to properties. And as we will try to point out more and more, there are structurally racist impediments to these processes, whether it is the collateral that is required to get a loan, whether it is a bank that has circled an area on the map and said they will not lend in this neighborhood, whether it is a type of project that they do not feel is going to be successful. The banks have a certain amount of power over how projects get financed. And so what Michael's pointing out, there are a number of different, and when I say that, we're talking about like the major banks. You're talking about a Chase Bank and name somebody out there who just doesn't want to, who's decided they're not going to do a project on the east side of Cleveland. They don't believe in the east side. They're not interested. Or maybe they don't believe in small commercial buildings. Maybe they don't think that the rent that can be generated in that building is going to be enough to pay off their loan. And that's a function of the Cleveland market in general. And so, appraisers look at the different price points across the industries, and they say, well, what are people charging for rent? And can that rent, what can a new project generate in terms of rent? And so what Michael showed earlier was a pretty complicated spreadsheet where we go through. We'll get to that a little bit more in session 4, where when we've laid out some more basics about like how all this plays a part together. But if the numbers don't work at the bottom, if it's not able to provide a profit, if it's not able to pay off that loan, then the bank doesn't have to make the loan. And so many of those small commercial buildings in Cleveland are not able to generate the amount of rent that is required to pay off the loan amount that would be needed to rehab that building. And so we have a big disparity in Cleveland. And so that's where we talk about public financing, where Michael and I worked. A lot of the grant dollars, the low interest loans, whether it's the alternative lenders at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, the city, the county, we're always trying to figure out how can we make these numbers work so that development can occur. So great question, very complicated, and it lays the groundwork for how all of this stuff comes together. All right, let's see. What is the process for getting a loan to buy a house for those who don't have a 9-to-5 job? Okay, Michael, you're on mute.
I'm thinking about that because depending on, when you're buying a house, one of the things they're going to look at is income. And so if you don't have a 9-to-5, I mean, I would say entrepreneurs don't necessarily work 9-to-5 jobs. So I'm wondering, maybe do you have any other kind of job or income coming in order to say, hey, in the event that I'm not able to pay back this loan through, let's just say, your performer that you developed, and say, hey, my tenants will pay this amount, or my business is going to do this much in revenue. What's the plan B? And I always talk to those looking to go into real estate or any kind of loan for that matter. What is a plan B? You're going to have some form of collateral in order to get into real estate or get any kind of loan, and or a personal guarantee, depending on the financial institution. So it's very challenging for someone with no income, whether that is because you own a business or you are working a 9-to-5 or working a 9-to-5. So that's a kind of a challenging question. I don't know what the direct answer would be, other than having some having some money that you've saved over time that you can buy outright property. But other than that, you're really going to have to show, where am I getting my income from, and then prove to a lender that that source of income is going to be reliable. So let's just say you can put a down payment of, 20, 30, maybe even 40% if you don't have any income coming in. You're going to have to tell a pretty good story to a lender to say, hey, I need a loan to cover the rest.
And there's a link in a chat for one of our nonprofit partners, Cleveland Housing Network, who has a new loan product out that you might want to take a look at. There are definitely call Cleveland Housing Network, because they have specific home buying counseling and help for people who are looking to buy a house. I would also say that, like Michael was saying, or a little bit alluding to, there are other, we'll talk about some other websites that you can look for homes, and the county land bank also takes in forfeiture properties for rehab, and a number of different ways to try to look for homes. All right.
Thanks everyone for those links. I'm saying
they're great. Thank you. Thank you.
This is about those connections we were talking about earlier, Barga.
That's right. There you go. Special shout out to Jessica Trevisano from Detroit Shoreway. Thank you, Jessica. All right. Why don't we wrap up the next slide here? It's been a real pleasure spending this hour with you. In the next session, Michael and I, we tried to give you a nice introduction to real estate tonight. I hope you feel like we've laid some of the groundwork. This has been recorded, and we're going to send it out it'll be on the Midtown page. It'll be on our Twitter, LinkedIn, all those places. And you'll get an email after this with this recording and the presentation. So please, if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to Michael and I. We'll have our emails in there. The next session is going to be about the development process and sort of walking through some of the stages of development, or what I like to talk about is sort of like all of the questions you should ask before development actually happens. Before you put a shovel in the ground, before you're buying property, you should be thinking about these questions. And then talk a little bit more about construction and the operation of real estate as well. So it's been a real pleasure. I want to say thank you again to Michael and Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. I am going to just wrap this evening up tonight with one other thought over here. I want to just show you guys, see if everybody can see this. We have a great event happening in Midtown. Caffeine Beats, the Midtown mixtape on April 29th. If you're interested, at 5:30 p.m. It's our virtual concert series. We've also launched a neighborhood career hotline with our partners at Towards Employment, Metro West, and Burton Bell Carr. So please, if you know people who are need jobs or are interested in getting some career services, please feel free to pass this phone number along. But just a very special thank you for coming, and hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Michael, for being my partner, and we'll look to see everybody back here in a month.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Varga. Thanks, Midtown.
Great. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.